got retro changing slides. No question about this, 98% of businesses in Canada are small businesses. They're chamber members, they go about their day-to-day work, they're not politically active, they just are there to provide a service or build something and go about their daily lives, raise families, and contribute to their communities. Of course, 71% of the private sector employees, or 71% of the people are employed by the private sector. Again, no surprises here. This is where the wealth's created. This is where the jobs are created. It's not created in Ottawa. They're not created in Regina. They're small businesses. 2/3 earn less than $73,000 a year. Half the group earns less than $33,000 per year. They're not multi-millionaires. They're not tax cheats. They're just hardworking individuals contributing to the economy. Currently, farm and local businesses are the family ventures, spouses, siblings, children all pitch in. Business can compensate them, called income sprinkling. Now the government's made some changes. At first they weren't going to allow this at all. Now they're saying that they're going to subject to what they call a reasonable test. So basically what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to prove to them that if you're paying your kids, if you're paying your wife or spouse, okay, you have to justify it. You have to understand or convince CRA that it's justifiable. You just can't say at tax time, okay, let's spread the income out and adjust the taxes for everybody and make our whole family bigger. No, you actually are going to have to go through the process of justifying why your son got that money and why your spouse got that money. Okay? Big businesses don't face the same burden. And that's been our biggest critique of the, there's ghosts here, I guess, of us in Ottawa is when you start looking at who this actually impacts. Big businesses, anything traded on the stock exchange, they're exempt. They're not, it doesn't apply. So Morneau Chappelle, who happens to be the company of the finance minister, his business do not face what you guys would face here. You think income sprinkling is a big deal. You say, okay, that's going to raise a lot of money for the government. In the big picture, it doesn't. It's $250 million over $3 billion in revenue. So they're not going to make a huge cash windfall, but it is a substantial amount. It doesn't take in acknowledgments for work that's done in a family operation. You know, income sprinkling allows you to pay your spouse, allows you to pay your kids, because they are involved. And it may be a situation where they get home from school and they are out picking stones like I used to do in the farm, or they're going back to your small business and just managing the till. There's not necessarily a time clock attached to that, but it is part of the growth of your family operation, and it's very important. And there has to be some acknowledgement for that. Again, they were going to take all that away. To characterize them as tax cheats is wrong. It just means you really don't understand small business. Now, if you want to talk about other people that have holdings in all sorts of other countries who lied to put that money into those holdings, that's a tax cheat. To have holdings in other countries, that's not a problem. There's legal ways to do that. If you want to close those loopholes, we can do that. But when you break the law to get the money into other countries, or you just don't disclose things properly, now you're a tax cheat. And that tends to be that group that was in the Paradise Papers, not the people in this room. Next slide. So right now you can save money within your company, and that's what we call passive income. So you have a good year, you save the money in your company, you pay a lower tax rate. And the idea is if you have a machine breakdown, you need a forklift or something like that, well then you go into that income and pull it forward or use it up, those savings, to buy that asset that you require. Now they want to tax you twice on that. They basically want to call it passive income, which means it's similar to investment income. So you're going to get taxed at the higher rate. That's 73%. So you have to look at it and say, okay, so I've got an extra $50,000 this year, or let's say $25,000 this year. I'm going to put it in some mutual funds just to park it off to the side for now so that I can get easy access at it next year. That interest is going to be taxed at the higher rate now at 73%. So you're going to get taxed at 50%, and actually I've got a slide that will show it, and then you're going to get taxed again when you pull the money out. So you can see there, a public corporation total taxes are 55.5% roughly. Current tax rate for small businesses is about the same, 55, 56%. The Liberal plan, because of how they're changing your dividends, actually brings it up to 73%. It's not fair. It's not right. In fact, when you look at the public and the current being relatively equal, that's kind of a balanced tax system when you have that scenario. Now you create a situation where all of a sudden the small business folks are paying substantially more than the public companies, and that's a problem. So you can kind of see what's happened with your dollars as it moves through the system and comes back to your pocket. Again, make the point. Big companies who are supposedly the ones that they're going to tax more, the wealthier, to help out the middle class, this is doing totally the opposite. I think we've gone through this for the most part, just explaining the passive income and what it means. Now, I will point out there was some changes made after pressure, and this is where we've had some good results in lobbying from both the Chamber and from you folks and people right across Canada. What we did is we're very strategic. When these changes came out, there's a finance chair, Wayne Easter from Atlantic Canada, looked at it and says, there's no way I can support that. And he happens to be a Liberal member of Parliament. When he did that, that gave us an opening in Atlantic Canada to actually go to all those MPs and say, Wayne Easter isn't supporting it, why are you supporting it? And Wayne Easter told me, he says, if you went to Atlantic Canada, this was like the long gun registry and unemployment insurance wrapped up together. That's how toxic these changes were in Atlantic Canada. So if you wanted to make changes in the system, what do? You lobby the Liberals in Atlantic Canada whose seats are at risk. And that's where folks like you in Atlantic Canada were very effective in creating a ruckus within the Liberal caucus to get their Prime Minister and Finance Minister to backtrack on a lot of these things. So a combination of pressure in the House from us, and a combination of pressure in the ridings to the individual MPs, we did see some changes and some success. So you can take credit for that, and the Chamber should take credit for that for sure. Same with the CME and other groups that all align to say this is absolutely wrong. So they brought in basically a $50,000 limit. So you can actually make $50,000 in passive income before you're taxed twice. Not great, not what we had before, but it is definitely better than what they were actually proposing. Capital gains conversion. This is again another place where we had some good success in lobbying to get them to backtrack on what they had proposed. They had proposed that you'd be access to your lifetime capital gains exemption, which for farmers is a big, big deal. You know, we just spent in the previous government raising that capital gains exemption, giving a bigger cushion for people to retire, because in a lot of cases the farm retirement is the asset itself. It's the land, it's the renting of that land. It's not like they've got a large amount of cash sitting in the bank account plus this huge asset. It's usually one or the other in most small businesses. So when you go to retirement, you look at, okay, me selling my business gives me the capital to have a nice retirement. But if they come in and take away your capital gains exemption, well, all of a sudden you better start rethinking about how you're going to retire, because now your business is subject to that capital gains exemption, or loss of that capital gains exemption. So again, they backtracked on this, and we'll go to the next slide. So you can see, that's a different slide, must have went to the first slide again. You can see when they backtracked on that, and they say they're not going to do that at this point in time. So we've got to keep the pressure on, but in the same breath, we've had success getting it changed. Next one. This is why you heard a lot of people talk about the death of the family farm. And actually, the passive income in the farming example was also problematic. You know, for example, I've got a land in my company and I go and rent that land. I'm 60 years old, so I'm going to rent it to my son. Well, it used to be that would just be income. Now that would be considered passive income. So instead of taxed at the lower rate and then taxed again when you in your company and then taxed again when you took it out, you'd be considered at the higher 73% rate. And it actually created a disincentive for you to sell your farm to your kids or your business to your kids. Because if you sold it to somebody else, the arm's length transaction was a lower tax rate than a family transaction. And again, I'll let the accountants explain that better than I can explain it, but basically it made it next to impossible for a family farm to be transferred to the family members. And I had one farmer come up to me and says, I'm in a situation where I've just started to transfer my land to my kids. I've got 3 sons that want to farm. The oldest son, I started the process 3 years ago, so I did it under the old system. And he says, now I'm looking at doing it for my kids, the second oldest son. And he says, now I have to go to the different system, but I need more money out of the second son to be in the same situation for me to retire. And the second son's screaming bloody murder. He's saying, why do I have to pay more than the first son? That's because of the changes that came into place, or what being proposed to come into place. And again, it's best to talk to the accountants on how it's going to impact your personal business, but that's something I'd encourage you to do. The next slide. Why? There's no question that the tax codes and tax changes should be reviewed, and it has been a while since it's been done. But normally when you do a tax review, they set up a special committee, they usually, or under the finance committee, normally a special committee, and then they do a year-long or even 2-year-long review across Canada through consultations, talking to experts, businesses, industry, all sorts of associations to come and identify what changes we'd like to see and what type of changes should come into place. They're going to do this major tax change in a matter of months. No consultations across Canada. Basically, it's just going to come straight forward. And you say, well, why are you doing that? Why so fast? Why not just back off and do it right and do it once, and then we'll do it again in 8 years when it needs to be modernized again? It's deficits. They're spending money like crazy. Forecast election, $10 billion. You're supposed to be happy it's only $19 billion because their forecast was $26 billion. Ralph Goodale used to do that trick when he was finance minister. He'd say, oh, our deficit's going to be $20 billion, and then come in at $15 billion, and we'd all be excited because he actually saved more than what they forecasted to spend. It's just numbers. It's just out of the sky is that $26 billion. The real number is $19 billion, and what you compare it to is the $10 billion that he promised during the campaign. And you have to ask him, where's the $9 billion? I don't see a bridge in Prince Albert. I don't see a hospital in Prince Albert. I don't see lift stations in Kinistino or Dimplin or Tisdale. So that's a problem. When you start to look at where they're spending money, it's disturbing. And normally I don't get partisan, but I will be a little bit partisan here. This one here is the Asian Development Bank. It's for infrastructure in Asia. It's run by the Chinese, and basically it's infrastructure in China. Last budget, they committed $360 million US, or 500 million Canadian, first tranche into that Asian Development Bank. We had the S&C Lavalin, the big engineering firms in front of the Trade Committee last spring, and we asked them, out of this $500 million, how much is your share? 0. Well, how much is committed to Canadian companies doing work in Asia? Nothing. So where does this money actually go? It builds Chinese infrastructure. And one of the most ironic things it's building right now is a pipeline. And you just can't make this stuff up. That's real. That, to me, is really concerning. And you say, okay, what's the logic in that? The Americans said don't do it. The Japanese said don't do it. They would not participate in this bank. Why are we doing it? And I think the truth to be told here in the next few months, when we start looking at what's happening in Asia and how we're positioning ourselves with China versus other Asian countries. And I think we've seen part of that last week at TPP talks when he didn't show up at the table. Next slide. Right now, that number's real. $8,337 per person is what we're spending. Highest ever. Again, if you want to spend money and you're going to put it on hard assets, you're going to put it on infrastructure, you're going to put it on things that set our economy up for the next generation and for the next 20 or 30 years, I could maybe sell that to you guys. But I don't see any of that happening. I don't see any of that investment in our infrastructure. I don't see any investment into our universities. They've got these super clusters, but they tend to be sporadic and not necessarily a bad idea, but it doesn't account for the increase in spending. So basically, again, I use the comment on a lot of my tweets, rip up his credit card. We need to rip up his credit cards. Next slide. They're running out of money. They're looking for ways to bring back their deficits to a lower reasonable number, and they're expecting you guys to pay for it all. Next slide. There's some things that we're seeing now that are really concerning, and that's how they're now interpreting existing rules. An example that came up this last 2 weeks is the disability tax credit. Diabetics who historically received this credit were now being denied. And the reason being was nothing that you could necessarily justify it. They were trying to say, well, they needed to have more auditors or more internal people to approve these claims, but they're denying them right now. So they're going to hire more of these professional nurses, which is not a problem with the nurses. What the problem we see is you have to get a document signed by your doctor to say that you qualify. So why do I need to have a nurse review a document from the doctors at CRA to say I qualify or not? The doctor's note should be good enough, would you not? Why are we adding that second level of bureaucracy in there? Why are we adding all that cost into the system? The reason is they're just making it tougher for you to get the credits back and to get the returns back that you expect to get. You've seen the, again, we had some success on this when they're going to tax employee benefits. So if I worked at a shoe store, get 10% off shoes, they're going to take that 10% and tax you. Again, they backtracked on that. And actually the bureaucracy tried to push that through when Jim Flaherty was finance minister, and Jim said absolutely no way. Again, it comes back to having competent people at CRA around the minister, and the minister being competent herself to say, no, this is not going to happen, and push back, instead of just rubber stamping whatever the bureaucracy throws back at you. And here's a classic example of what they did. The bureaucracy threw it back at her, she just rubber stamped it, and it's going to happen. Then all of a sudden they realized that, holy cow, this is bad politically. Then they pulled it back. It makes you concerned, because if they're doing it on this issue, what other issues are in the background right now that they're scheming to take away benefits that you're existingly getting? And that concerns us for sure. What you can do, again, we've had great success with the chamber, Perrin Beatty and you guys here. You have to keep the pressure on these guys. 2019 doesn't come soon enough, and I can't wait to 2019 to be sitting there with Andrew Scheer as we kick these bums out of office, because they have to go. I can't afford, or you can't afford, or we can't afford another 4 years of this mismanagement. Get a hold of Ralph Goodell. Send him an email, phone his riding office, phone him in Ottawa. Make sure he gets the message that that actually is not acceptable. You have to do it. This is one of the few times where if you don't have people actually acting in mass, you'll be sitting here a year from now or 2 years from now paying a lot of money out of your pockets. So that's one thing you can do. Again, get a hold of the finance minister. It's kind of interesting. I have a little story. He got up in question period one day and he talked about all these changes, and he says, well, I want to talk to all your farmers who are impacted by this change. Well, there's a guy by the name of Hugh Walleye who lives in Nipawin, who I know fairly well. So I actually took his name's Terry Usawa. I took Terry's name and phone number, sent it over with the page and said, here's the number, phone him. And he actually, to his credit, he actually called Terry, which I thought was pretty good. The difference, though, Terry said, is the phone call wasn't him listening, it was him explaining how the accountants have it wrong. That was his phone call. And if you know Terry Usawa, Terry used to be a director of the Agricor United. He was the head of the Canola Council. He's not your average farmer. He's sharp. And he was frustrated, even more frustrated after that phone call, and became more active after that phone call, because he realized these guys aren't listening, and unless you put the pressure on, they will never listen. We've got some petitions for you to sign. Richard's got them here, up here. So you can definitely do that. Take them back to your businesses and get them signed, and then I'll present them in the House. They do have impact, because it forces the government to respond to the petition. So when we put a petition forward, they can't just, okay, and park it. They actually have to respond back to us on their logic and why they're doing what they're doing. So that's why the value in the petitions is so important. I think that's about the bulk of the presentation, but I did want to open up for questions, and not just questions on the tax changes, but any type of questions that you may have going on in Ottawa, on NAFTA, last weekend TPPs, embarrassment. I'll open the floor up to anybody.
Randy, can you comment on your opinions